into lava rock, it would probably die because it's going to be in the stairway. So there are some, caveats there. Like if an orchid like this, I might use what's called sphagnum moss for it because that stuff stays wetter, and these guys like to stay wetter.
Or hot food.
Yeah, you can use
hot food.
Yeah, for sure. This one has a little
If
bit
you have a
more
big
rock.
chunk, you can tie it to it or put it in deep on the
in
top.
there, for sure.
Yeah.
And that holds some water, but not too much.
Yeah.
And these might be on the edge of that because the hot food might not hold quite enough water for something like this. But it would be great for like an on-season. Great idea. Did that answer your question? Or your question, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
The fact that I haven't touched the two orchids that I have,
They might want to repot it, Holly. Yeah, they probably want to repot it.
alive, so we might want to encourage them.
Yeah, you can repot them. That'll be great. You should have come to Sue's talk just before mine. She talked about repotting. Who else? Anybody else have a question about anything? What?
One last one.
Yes.
Are those the only two that flower, the ones that you've shown us, of all of the 6?
Okay. So all orchids get flowers. All orchids don't have flowers 100% of the time. So all orchids grow what is called a spike. So this one's starting a spike here. And this spike will eventually produce a couple of buds and a couple of flowers. On this orchid, those flowers will probably last 2 to 3 weeks. And then they'll kind of start to, like yours, they kind of start to fall off. And then the orchid will usually make a new growth. And then the same thing will happen. So that's one of the main things and why it's so important to know how to identify your orchids even when they don't have flowers. Because I was just showing you how Ingrid bought that orchid, or was given that orchid today, and it doesn't have a flower, and she took it home and didn't know what type it was. She wouldn't know how to care for it. She might put it on her rock wall, and it's not going to do well there because one, it's not wet enough, and two, it gets too much sun there. So that might not be true because you have to what it wasn't, you know what I mean. So all of these will flower. I just happened. I know what else I wanted to show you on Phalaenopsis. So these are Phalaenopsis orchids. This is a Phalaenopsis orchid, and this stem is the first time this one has bloomed. This spike. This one bloomed out here. I cut it off when it turned brown, but it wasn't brown down here, so I left it. So after a Phalaenopsis orchid blooms, the flowers die. If the spike stays green, leave it alone, because it will make another spike off of that same spike. So this one grew this spike and it flowered. The flowers died, I left it alone. It grew this spike, it flowered. Again, I left it alone. Then it grew this one off that, and it's flowering off that one now. Same here, same thing happened. You can see this brown, I could cut that off, or I can pull it off right now. But you can cut it off where it's brown. But if it's still green, especially on a Phalaenopsis, leave it alone because it's probably going to fall anyway. Especially if it's reasonably active. Apparently this orchid is getting enough light that it'll flower. So I did want to show you that. Any other questions, guys? Okay, fertilizer. Yes, fertilizer orchids. You can use an orchid specific fertilizer. That's great, and use it at the direction given the direction on the back. You can also use a general fertilizer, like a typical fertilizer for tomatoes or something. If you do that, yeah, you can. I usually use 13, 11, 11, but that's just me. And honestly, as long as they're getting the nutrients, it'll be okay. If you use a typical fertilizer like that, use it at between 1/4 and 1/2 the strength recommended. Because orchids are a little bit sensitive to nutrients. If you do too much fertilizer, you can over-fertilize them and burn them. So I would start with 1/4 of what it says, and then maybe move up just a little bit, and maybe top out at half of what the package says. You're using. What's your question?
How about are we doing encourage?
Yes. Most orchids bloom once a year. And if you know exactly the type you have, you'll kind of know the season that it'll bloom, and that's great. Phalaenopsis tend to bloom anytime here because, seasons in Hawaii are a little bit different. So Phalaenopsis to help them to bloom is to fertilize them. If they don't have enough fertilizer, they're less likely to bloom. Another way is to make sure they're getting the right amount of water, not too much to make them like stressed and thinking about rotting, but not so little that they're too dry. So if you give it good conditions, that's really the easiest way to make an orchid bloom. There are some types of orchids, especially here in Hawaii, that will bloom 2 or 3 times a year because, like I said, seasons are low fluid here. So those types, you know, again, some people will also do Epsom salts, like just a tiny bit, and that's a little more of an advanced thing. I think I don't know about most of you guys are pretty new to orchids.
They use them for fruit trees too.
Yes, yeah. So
It says it on the back.
yes, I wouldn't recommend like going and throwing Epsom salts on that guy just yet. But after you've been growing orchids a couple years, that's another way that you can kind of force something into blooming is to give it some Epsom salts. That extra magnesium cycle kind of helps it sometimes to bloom. But that's another one that if you do too much of that, it can stress it. So it's a very fine balancing act there. And like I said, if you're newer to orchids, that wouldn't be something I'd recommend.